So for more on the rising risk of Western alienation, we're now joined by Gwyn Morgan. He's the former CEO of Encana. Great to be able to catch up with you on this such an important area and focus for all Canadians. Gwyn, what's your view in terms of what's happening right now?
Well, Catherine, you know, we talked about it for years, about the last number of years trying to get pipelines on stream, and that's been proved out to be unsuccessful. But really what's happening now is a much broader. When you have people who feel, for example, in Alberta, who are proud of what they do, they produce something that everybody needs, and they're really good at it, and they're some of the best and cleanest in the world at it, and they get vilified by people like Catherine McKenna, the Minister of Environment, and of course Trudeaus saying earlier on in his mandate that, you know, we have to phase out the oil sands and so on. It becomes more than just economics. It becomes, what is our place in this Canada? Are we appreciated? Does anybody really care about us? 2,000 workers get laid off in a plant in Ontario, auto workers, 100,000 people. And the Prime Minister goes and visits with the people in the 2,000 people who got laid off in the factory, never came to Alberta. So, you know, at least to talk about that issue. It's sort of a feeling of, I guess you could call it alienation, which is the big word right now. But it's really a hurt, a deep, deep hurt that these people feel. They're proud of what they do. They're proud Canadians, and they feel really that they don't really have a future here. You know, there's an article in the online C2C journal that says, you know, does Canada really want, do Albertans really want to be in Canada? And it's really interesting reading, but it points out that this is well beyond, you know, pipelines and economics and all that sort of stuff. It's a sense that Laurentian Canada, which is Ontario and Quebec, is always going to dominate, and the West is never going to really be treated fairly. And when you have that sort of fundamental kind of undercurrent, and then all hopes dashed by the last election because they just don't think they have a chance under the Trudeau government to get any better, you end up with a country that where the divisiveness is really big. And that's sad. As a proud Canadian, I'm very sad, and I'm sad about the personal and the toll on people and their families that this is all producing.
Absolutely. But at the same time, we heard from Prime Minister Trudeau today that they are committed to moving Trans Mountain Pipeline forward. But we have heard that for a year and a half. So is it different this time?
Well, you know, as I said, Catherine, I think they will do it because, you know, they got the pipeline. They don't have a whole lot of choice, and you know, it would be just complete. Everything I've said, you know, would be that much worse if they don't do that. But it's gotten, you know, the problem is it's gotten way beyond that. I mean, here we have in the province of Quebec, you know, which has always complained about their part in Canada. You know, that we're not getting a good enough deal. Now they elect a bunch of separatists who can really put more leverage on. That's what it's all about, putting more leverage on Ottawa to give them more. But meanwhile, they get a $13 billion equalization grant, largely funded by taxpayers from Alberta. They also. So they get that, and then on top of that, they say we don't want the oil pipeline crossing, the Energy East crossing our province, and the Trudeau government gives in to them. Right. So when we have that sort of stuff happening, Albertans are looking at this and say, gee, you know, do we really count? Is this a place we can stay?
So how do you then see this playing out, in the sense that, do you see somehow, some way, Alberta somehow taking back that $13 billion in equalization payments somehow? Or do you see, I don't know how that would work, but I'm just saying, and if you really walk this through, the potentials here, or do you see Ottawa siding with Western Canada as opposed to Quebec? I mean, where do we go from here?
Well, as I said, you know, that CDC article make it pretty clear, and we all know that it's always been the case that when it comes right down to it, Laurentian Canada sticks together and sides with Quebec and to a degree with Ontario. So Albertans have given up on that, I think. They realize that their place in Canada is never going to be equal. And all this other stuff, that the pipelines and all the other things, that are really just reinforces the same tragic outcome that no matter what we do, no matter what now the government does, this election was our last hope. And when people who are resilient and strong and hopeful finally give up, that's a dangerous thing.
So how do you see that playing out, though? If people truly believe that that was the last hope, what's going to be their next step?
Well, you know, I guess it's hard to say. I think if you beat people down enough, they rise up. And so, you know, there is, you know, everybody knows that after Quebec nearly left, there's now a law in the country that says you can hold a vote. And you know, everybody says, well, we can't get our oil out if we're not part of, we can't get across the tidewater. But you know, when you get emotion and hurt, you just don't know what'll happen. And that's you know, if it's bad enough, I mean, you know, even the election was very damaging in itself. Jag Maxine comes to town and says, well, you know, we're going to have to get rid of the oil sands, but we'll find other jobs for you. These are people whose whole careers, their life, their skills, and they're proud of those skills, and they're producing something necessary, and they hear that. Right. It was just another one of those really unfortunate things. And they were hanging on about the election, and now that hope's been lost. So, but we're also hearing from leaders, from premiers, saying that they're not going to be pushed out of their own country. But what you're telling me and what you're suggesting is that maybe they will. Maybe they will decide that that's the best business decision, that's the best business model for them, particularly, as you say, given all the hurt, given almost the deafness that is not translating to some of the other leaders out there. Well, at very least, you know, people are getting more and more aware that Quebec, through the threat of separation that constantly is there, and now it's even more there with this election, they're saying, well, you know, maybe we need to do that. Maybe we need to get some leverage. We need to put ourselves in a position where it's realistic that we will separate. And maybe that will give us leverage because we haven't got anything else that worked. Mm-hmm. Would you be in support of that? Well, I certainly wouldn't be supportive of dividing this country. I mean, I've been a proud Canadian and for years and tried to be a unifier. But I don't know what matters, whether I'd be supportive or not. I think what really matters is how people feel. And they need to be, they need to have a feeling that there's a place where people really care. They don't really, most people in Alberta now have concluded that, you know, Central Canada and the government of the country don't really care. And that is, that's emotion. And when it's backed up by job losses, people that have been out of the work long enough to think they'll never ever get back in again, you know, all of these things what that means to their futures and their ability to keep their houses. When you have all of that coming together, it's profound. It is profound. But what do you think might help, not rectify the situation, but help rectify the situation? Well, there'd have to be a huge change in tone, first of all, from the government itself. And if Gerald Butts comes back in and becomes the architect of economic and fossil fuel and other policy in the country, and with Catherine McKinnon back where she was, and if Trudeau doesn't change his tune very much in a real way, because people don't trust him anymore, really. Right. And that's another issue. So it's hard to know, but there would have to be a massive effort. And it would have to be a complete turnaround of where things have been going. Gwyn, when you hear, though, Catherine McKenna, who I've interviewed, and Justin Trudeau speak, and their view of where they want to take Canada,
Do you really believe that they will get this pipeline built, or do you think it's just going to be the continuation of delayed tactics, which is what we've seen for the past year and a half? They speak, and they speak in one way, but it's almost as though they've got this hidden agenda. That's what the results would show.
Well, I hate to be cynical, but I'm because I never have been, but I think they'll build the pipeline because they've already got they've got a lot of political capital in there. The polls say that the Canadians want that pipeline built. They want the government to get their money back, and there's a huge number all along that pipeline route. There's a lot of First Nations who are counting on it. There's just the ones here in Vancouver that are against it. And so they have a big part of their future in that. And now there's a group of First Nations that actually want to buy it. So there's a lot of reasons why not doing this would have more negative consequences politically for the Trudeau government than not doing it, or than doing it. And I hate to be cynical, but I think that's what'll drive them more than how much they care about the West.
Will that be enough to help the West?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's interesting, Catherine, if it happened, a couple of years ago or whatever, and they got it going and they got it done, that would have been helpful. But everybody also remembers they killed 3 other pipelines,
right,
including Energy East, that would have been on stream by now, and the oil was going to move through the pipeline was already in the ground. So they remember all those things, and sure, it would help somewhat. It'll help to get the oil on stream. It won't solve all of the problems, but it's like too little, too late.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's been so much damage done that didn't have to be done,
right? And
it could have been different.
Gwyn, with your success and what we're talking about here as it relates to where we stand on an economic perspective and maybe where we're going or not going, that's a big issue. A lot of people critiqued the fact that none of the platforms really talked about Canada's economic vision. I'm curious, have you, moved your investments outside of Canada? Do you invest at all in Canada? What do you do?
Well, I hedge.
Ha.
Like in other words, I try to make myself reasonably neutral about as I can about what's happening in Canada in different ways. Not necessarily moving outside the country, it's just the nature of the investments.
Right, but like many foreign investors who have really, in the energy sector, have pulled their money out or not invested or reinvested, it doesn't sound like you're really putting a lot of new money to work in Canada.
No, and the Fraser Institute came out at the end of last year with a report that said that the investment in Canada had gone down by 74%, and the increases in Canadian investment abroad, I'm talking about the foreign investment, Canadians investing abroad increased by 54%. And the Business Council did a survey and said, what about doing business in Canada? And they concluded that, a lot of them concluded that the regulatory process was too uncertain and too difficult. Mm-hmm. Can't get it done. And the World Bank came out and said, they said that one of the big problems was that, there was just this sense that Canada wasn't a place to do business. It ranked, we dropped from number 4 or 6, I think it was, to number 22 in the World Bank rankings as a place to do business under the Trudeau government. Mm. So really what's happening here is, this is a little off the topic, but when you look at why the economy is still doing well, it is because the government has been pouring huge amounts of debt into the debt-funded spending into the economy, which has replaced a lot of the private sector investment that's leaving the country. That can't carry on, because otherwise, sooner or later, you're going to hit the wall. But that's the reality. The business sector is not investing in this country; it's investing elsewhere. and the government is keep pouring money in and trying to keep the water from going underwater country-wise.
And Gwyn, add to that the fact that consumers are also essentially doing the same thing with these lower for longer interest rates, with an astounding number higher than the United States of $1.76 of debt to income levels. Individuals in Canada on average owe $1.76 per dollar that they make in income. So it's, you've got the government doing it and you've got the consumer doing it. You have to wonder, to your point, how long can that last? And unfortunately, it's not an environment where businesses are spending.
I'll give you one little statistic about government spending. I talked about how that's the only thing that's kept the economy afloat temporarily. If you look at the $93 billion that are planned to be invested by the Liberal government in terms of deficit spending in the next 4 years, and that's assuming that the NDP doesn't force them to go higher. And then you look at the current cost of $26 billion a year just to service the current debt. If you add 2% rise in the interest rate, and you add that extra, you analyze that extra money that over the 4 years of $93 billion, you end up with a number of $79 billion a year in deficit servicing and deficit spending. $79 billion a year. And that's just a 2% rise in interest rates.
Wow.
So, you know,
that's
this
nothing.
is very worrying.
Yeah. I mean,
especially
nothing,
when the private sector is disappearing.
Yeah, and when I say nothing, I mean the 2% rise isn't much, and you're already at $79 billion.
Yeah, and 2% is not very much. And you know, as you spend more money, your balance sheet gets worse. The cost of funding that goes higher. People say, well, you know, there's already concern internationally about Canada's deficit spending among investors. So if it keeps on going, they say, well, you know, I guess I'm going to have a better return. I want a little more interest. And that happens.
But Gwyn, what's interesting to me is what we're talking about today only resonates with some people. It doesn't resonate with a lot of people. It wasn't even on the platforms of any party. Why doesn't it translate? And at what point will it? Will it translate when we have even more hallway hospitals, when education gets pulled back even further for young people? At what point will people say, my goodness, this isn't working for me anymore?
Well, you know, you talk about young people. I mean, in fact, I have a column coming out in National Post in the next little while that talks about why do the young people vote Liberal or vote, you know, don't vote for why don't the young people worry about deficit spending? And part of the answer is that they haven't learned the consequences of it. But when you look at it, even today, if you add provincial and national debt and put it out on a per person basis, you know, the people, the Ontario, for example, each man, woman, and child owes $43,000 already, so that is not going to be paid by those of us who are baby boomers and beyond,
yeah,
or close to it. It's going to be paid by them.
Yeah,
it's going to be paid for. They have to pay for it. It's like, okay. You know, we've got this house that we've got this huge mortgage on. We're going to pass it on to our kids. And by the way, the kids are also going to have to take care of us as we get older.
Right.
They have a huge problem coming, and you know, that kind of communication needs to somehow get to them.
Well, maybe in your article. Gwyn, nice to catch up with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is Gwyn Morgan.
Let's all hope for the better.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. That is Gwyn Morgan, the former CEO of Encana.